I looked at Maurice, I looked at the people, and I turned around and I looked at the band, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm in Earth, Wind & Fire.
Today, life is great.
Welcome to KnoxCast, Music on Music. I'm trumpeter, composer, vocalist Knox Summerhour, and this is where the world's top musicians, composers, producers, and industry professionals tell us how they've made their way in the world of music for TV, film, video games, stage, studio, and more. If you're a musician, a music professional, a student, or simply a fan of great music and musicians, this podcast is for you. My first guest is multi-instrumentalist, vocalist, producer, songwriter, composer, Scott MAYO. Earth, Wind & Fire, Dancing with the Stars, the Emmy Awards, Sergio Mendes, Queen Latifah, the B.E.T. Awards. These are just some of the diverse acts Scott's been associated with over the years. It's my honor to call him a friend of mine, and I'm grateful he could join me for the very first episode of KnoxCast, Music on Music. Scott MAYO, first of all, thanks for being my very first guest here on KnoxCast, Music on Music, whatever we're calling this thing. I first must say I remember the day I met you a few years ago on the set of American Idol, and before we ran the first tune, I think you were on stage running a flute passage, or you were sound testing for some flute stuff, and I just I remember being taken aback by the beauty of your jazz flute sound. I had not heard a sound quite like that, so clear. Sam Most, I got to hang out with him before he passed away, but I still I had never heard a sound like that in that context. It's such a clear, beautiful sound.
Oh, thank you.
Same with all your horns.
Thank you.
It's great to be sitting here in your still relatively new studio here in Pasadena. This is not about me, so I'm going to open it up for you and hopefully just let you talk. While we're on the subject, what was the main impetus for wanting to build your own studio versus working from another studio or working from home like a lot of us do? Mm-hmm. So what was the main inspiration or reason or impetus for that?
The main impetus was that I was getting to a place where I was working so much in my home studio that my home was becoming a business and it wasn't becoming a home. So I wanted to have my house be a house and have a place of business. So that kind of started it. I just wanted to not have 1,000 instruments in my house, and I just wanted to have a place that when I went to it, the sole purpose was to work. And it feels great because now that I have a house again, I go home and I rest from all of this stuff. And I come over here for the sole purpose of working, and it's great.
That's great to have. How many instruments do you have? 1,000 is probably close.
I got a bunch of instruments.
We'll get into that later. As far as your background in band and back in Michigan and stuff. Backing up a bit, how did you learn to produce on top of being an instrumentalist? How did you learn to produce, compose, mix, use Digital Performer or Logic or Pro Tools? How did that come about? Because everyone got there a little differently, everyone that does it. I wondered how that started for you.
Well, for me, when I was young, I used to read album credits a lot. And I used to see producers' names, and I didn't know what a producer was. And this was pre-internet, so I couldn't look up what a record producer was. But I started to notice that certain record producers that I liked, that they always used to have a particular sound. And so I started to get more records with those people's names on them. And I still had no idea what a record producer was. So when I moved to LA and I started doing sessions and I started to see what a producer does, and then I got a chance to start to ask them questions about how you put a record together and why you do this and how you do that. And so it's pretty cool that I got a chance to work with some legendary record producers that taught me how to produce a record.
That was my next question. Written right here. For those that don't know, what does a producer do? Can you answer that for those that don't know? Because I'm always learning too.
No, I can't. It's really easy. A record producer is the music equivalent of a film director. We are the ones that are responsible for taking the vision of the artist or the label and bringing that into fruition. That's our job. Literally. And so we are the ones who will hire the background singers, we'll hire the musicians, we'll do whatever we need to do to make sure that the song or the whole project sounds like whatever they were looking for.
And so a lot of people do come to you with that idea to pitch you their vision. and for you to spit it out in 2 speakers or 5 speakers or 7.1 surround.
Yes.
As an aside to that, or a direct relation to that question, what were your roles in producing the Grammy-nominated album for Olita Adams?
I produced 2 songs on an album. I was going to do more, but it just worked out that I only was able to do 2. And at the time, she and we toured together.
Oh, wow.
And I was a background singer for her. And
so many hats.
Yeah.
We'll
and
get
so
into that too.
I was a background singer for her. And we just kind of started talking about the album and sharing ideas about the album. I would share some of my production ideas. And then I ended up getting 2 songs on the record. And so that was what I did for that, like where she was, as a piano player, would sort of play these songs for me. And I would give her my vision as to what I would do as a producer. And we did it.
And was that after you had moved here?
Yeah, I lived in LA then.
You had met her here, and you guys... I'm always interested to know how they found you and asked you to go on tour with them, or how people get found to do that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't remember how I met Olita. A couple people I remember, like the Earth, Wind & Fire thing was really funny. I remember distinctly, not only because it was a fantasy band of mine that I always wanted to be in their band, but I remember it because I did a session for Philip Bailey. He did a solo album, and my friend at the time, Brian McKnight, and I were both managed by the same guy. So Brian called me to play saxophone on the record, and Philip was there. And so he was impressed with the way I played, and he said, "Hey, we're going to go out on the road again, and we're looking for a new saxophone player. Would you like to do it?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure." Not expecting that they would call, but then a few weeks later they called.
Wow.
So
backing up on that story, how did you meet Brian McKnight?
We were both managed by the same guy.
Okay, so that came about from that connection. And how did you get signed or become a client of this manager who already had Brian?
Because I met him through a friend. I met this guy that became our manager. His name was Herb Twawick. And he became our manager, and he was a manager at the time of a bunch of different artists. And I have a friend who's a friend of his, and we just started to get to know each other that way.
Just a couple guys having coffee, pretty much, right?
Yeah.
That's how a lot of this starts, isn't it?
Yep.
Especially around LA, where so many people are just are around. You know?
Yeah.
And it's part of it. I'm not telling you. I'm asking you. Is part of it just being in the right place? It's kind of like. Obviously, you're very talented, and there's a lot of talented people here. It just happens that you meet the right people at the right time in the right place, and you put yourself in the right place too, right? You have to put yourself in the right coffee shop.
I mean, the thing is, you have to understand that the entertainment business is based in Los Angeles. And so if you want to make a living in it, you have to deal with LA at some point in time in your career.
Would you say would you say it's the base for Western music? Because you work all around the world. Would you say it's the center of the music industry for what we consider the Western world, Europe and the Americas?
Well, I think it's the base of the entertainment business, not the artistic business, but the entertainment business. So if you want to be involved in the commercial side of music, I think you need to be in LA. Or deal with LA. At some point, you're going to have to come out here and just deal with this LA thing because the business is based here. And so for me, it became really about sort of proximity because I knew the artists lived here. And so I knew the auditions for the tours were going to be here. I knew that the rehearsals were going to be here. I knew they were going to do sessions here because they live here. They don't want to go to Memphis and do a recording session. Not that there's not good players in Memphis, because there are. But they want to just drive down the hill to a studio, and I happen to live here. So chances are I was going to get work from those artists that lived here.
And now you have a studio.
And now I have a studio.
Down the hill. From a lot of places where folks live, up in the hills of Glendale or Hollywood. I'm not going chronologically, I know, but I do want to start a little bit with your beginnings, because I think a lot of folks have a beginning in band, and you grew up in New York, Rochester,
upstate,
but you also went to college at Michigan. which is the heart, along with the SEC teams or the SEC schools, Big Ten, SEC. It seems
Absolutely.
like not just football, but band is a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
Was it a big deal growing up? And also, because I grew up in that environment too, where wind band is a big deal, marching band is a big deal, and there's a lot of literature out there, and there's a lot of great music. Did you grow up in that
I did.
tradition?
I did. And my high school teacher, Roger Eckers, is incredible. He's still incredible. He and I are very close to this day. And as a youngster, I didn't really realize the level of music that I was being exposed to at a high school level. We were playing Charles Ives. We played so much music, at a high school level, and we took trips. We did exchange programs with different schools from around the country, and it was just a really great program. So growing up as a young musician in Rochester, it was like the perfect environment. It was a perfect environment to grow up in.
Did you, after high school, give any thought to Eastman? Or was it always kind of, you wanted to go to a bigger school with the
I wanted
band
to get out
program?
of town. That's what I wanted
understand.
to do. I had to get out of town. And Eastman is great, but the saxophone professor and I didn't see eye to eye on
Was he all
things.
classical?
He was not all classical. I just didn't like him.
I see.
He just wasn't a nice person. And so I didn't want to study from him because he wasn't nice. And so my high school teacher brought Donald Cinta from the University of Michigan in as a guest artist.
Oh.
And I came down the hall and I heard this thing. I was like, what is that? And I couldn't figure out what it was. And that sort of started my introduction to Donald Cinta and classical saxophone.
That was a classical side, and there's a whole, I know a little bit about the classical side, the measured vibrato of the saxophone. And, I understand why folks do it. But at what point did you always play jazz or by ear or soul or funk? When did that come into your consciousness as a student or as a young musician?
I kind of always played, as a young musician, you play in band and all that stuff. And I wasn't really specialized. But my father, at some point, when he realized, okay, you're serious about this music thing, you need to learn jazz. And so he sat me down.
How was your dad told you?
That was
to
my
do it?
dad. And he played Miles Davis for me. And he played
Wow.
me, what was that album? It was a really weird album. It wasn't Bitches Brew, but it was another album. And I hated it. But there was something kind of intriguing about it. I was like, what is this madness? And so I was like, I think there's some other Miles Davis. And so I went back and I found this song called My Funny Valentine.
Mm-hmm.
And I fell in love with Miles Davis. And that sort of started it. And like a year later, I heard somebody sing some lyrics and I ran upstairs. I told my mother, I said, hey, I heard some lyrics on this Miles Davis song, My Funny Valentine. Because I didn't know that it was a song that Miles covered. I thought it was a Miles Davis song.
Of course, yeah.
And so that sort of started my journey into jazz. And my dad used to take me to jam sessions every Sunday night. And I would never play because I didn't know what a jam session was or how somebody just improvised. I didn't know what that was.
How old were you here?
I was probably 14.
14, just going into high school.
Yeah, just going into high school. And these older musicians were so encouraging. And so they would tell me stuff to listen to. So I went back and I learned the first chorus of Charlie Parker's Opera Valve. And I came back and I played that. And I played verbatim what Charlie Parker played. And they made it seem like I was the greatest thing since white bread. And that was just all the encouragement I needed to just keep coming back. So I didn't learn to improvise. I learned to just transcribe these solos. I would learn these solos and I'd go and I'd play them at the jazz session. And then these guys would slowly but surely teach me about improvisation and how to make up my own thing. So
In high school?
yeah. And so I learned jazz in a nightclub by the old-fashioned way.
Wow.
I didn't go to school for jazz. I'm a classically trained musician. And so I learned jazz from listening to records and hanging out with jazz musicians.
Regarding the different styles, some folks never didn't grow up playing classical music, but how does that help you to have a background in band classical music?
Well, I think for me, like my high school teacher, he was of the mindset that if you are going to play flute, you're going to sound like a flute player. You're not going to sound like a sax player who plays flute.
Yeah.
And same thing, if you're going to play clarinet, you're going to sound like a clarinet player. You're not going to sound like a doubler. So his whole thing was to teach us really solid flute technique, really solid clarinet technique, really solid technique on all of our instruments so that you wouldn't know what your thing was. You couldn't tell. You sounded just as good as all the flute players and just as good as all the clarinet players. That was just the standard. So by the time I started college, I was already a really good flute player and a really good clarinet player. And so when I went to college...
Was that your first instrument was sax?
My first instrument was clarinet.
Clarinet? Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
And then I started on sax. Then I added saxophone. Then I added flute.
Okay.
But when I went to college, since it was nothing but a conservatory, there was no other option. Like, they didn't understand the whole concept of doublers. I don't know what that means, like doublers. So if you're here to study clarinet, you're going to study clarinet, period. And so I started to learn orchestral approaches to clarinet and orchestral approaches to flute, as well as saxophone.
So,
and it just...
sorry to interrupt, to explain to folks who may not be musicians or just fans of music, what is a doubler?
Oh, a doubler is a person who plays more than one instrument. And
usually it's a quadrupler.
Yeah, exactly. And so in our case, as woodwind players, a lot of us will play clarinets, flutes, saxophones, double reeds being bassoon and oboe and things like that. And then all the different instruments in those families.
And do you still play oboe and bassoon and all those?
I do not play oboe or bassoon for one reason. When I was in college, I saw how much trouble the oboists and the bassoonists were having, and I'm like, I'm not playing those instruments because that's all they do, and they're having trouble with it.
And they have to make their own reeds.
Exactly. So I have a thing called an EWI,
right.
an electronic wind instrument, and it has wonderful oboe sounds and wonderful bassoon sounds. So that when I get called for those things, that's what I play.
Yeah, the EWI. I've been meaning to get an EWI for a long time for that reason too. Here's a taste of Scott's gorgeous soprano saxophone. This is the Gerald Wilson Orchestra playing Gerald Wilson's original composition, Romance. I gotta say, you don't usually like soprano sax, but your sound honestly is beautiful. That solo was live, right?
It was. It was literally. I mean, we did it. It was one take
In Monterey.
No, actually,
where?
the record was. It was a project that was commissioned by the Monterey Jazz Festival.
Okay.
So Gerald wrote for it, but we recorded it all at Capitol, and that was the first take.
Wow.
Yep.
Big band playing is kind of totally different, to me anyway, than even recording in a studio with a small horn section or playing soul, funk, and what you've done with Earth, Wind, and Fire.
Mm-hmm.
So how have you navigated that style? Because like Gerald Wilson grew up in a time where you could tour and make a living playing. Tell us a little bit about working with him in that vein.
Well, he was amazing. Gerald was a really open guy. Like, he liked to have young musicians around him. He liked to have new ideas. He was not in any way sort of limited to the past. He was always writing new stuff and listening to new things. But at the same time, for me, I think my greatest joy in playing with Gerald was the stories. He's a great storyteller.
After the show.
After the show,
After the
even
rehearsal.
during the show, like
Really
he would
telling
tell
the
the
stories.
greatest stories, and we're the band, and we've been in the band for a long time, and he still had new stories. Like, how are you coming up with this? You know, and to be a part of a guy that was literally a part of jazz history, literally a part of jazz history, and you know, it was just amazing to hear those stories.
Do you have a favorite?
I do, actually. Fletcher Henderson had a big band. Gerald Wilson played in it. Many people don't remember the Fletcher Henderson band. And he was leaving. He wanted to get rid of the band. So he asked Gerald, you know, he said, I'm thinking about getting rid of the band. Do you have any ideas on anybody who can take over the band? He said, yeah, there's this kid out of Kansas City, Bill Basie.
Oh.
You should call him. And so Bill Basie came in and took over the band that became the Count Basie Band because of Gerald Wilson's recommendation. Who says that? Who has a life like that?
All those guys knew each other.
Yeah, they
Such
did.
a small
Yeah.
circle of folks. I don't know how did they get connected? Do you know originally?
I just think that the word got spread.
This is before internet. There's no.
This
TV,
is exactly, but there was still a circuit. There was a circuit, and so Kansas City was on that circuit, and so Gerald Wilson, being from Detroit at the time, did the Detroit, Chicago, he did that whole circuit, and Kansas City was part of that, and so they all got to know. All the musicians knew each other because of that.
Performing live on tour with Earth, Wind and Fire, here's Scott's now famous solo from Reasons. Tell us a little bit about that show and what you remember about it.
Oh, but it's funny. This show's just etched into my mind because we only played arenas.
Right.
And the reason I remember that was because we did it at a large club, but it was a club. And it was because we had such a big stage that we could do all of our choreography and everything. And the reason I remember this club was because, one, it was a club. Two, it was so small that we couldn't dance. Like, we couldn't do any of our steps. And the audience was really close. And I'm not used to audiences being that close for an Earth, Wind & Fire show. And so the immediacy of the audience was pretty cool, And
It's like playing jazz.
Exactly. And so it was, for us, it was a club gig. It was a big club, but it still was a club gig for us. And it was really fun because we were all so tight on this stage, and we're not used to that. I'm used to running over to the drums, but now that I just take a couple steps and I'm at the drum set. And so that was it was a really fun night. And I just really remember sort of Maurice running back and forth to the truck to check the level during rehearsals. And it was just
even the big guys have to deal with sound issues at live shows.
Absolutely.
Doesn't matter what your status is or how long you've been doing it.
Well, because this was a one-night event. We were only going to record this one night. So it had to go down right. He had to get it right.
So it was meant to be recorded.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It wasn't like it was a mistake. It was set up like this was going to be
it sounds like it was.
Yeah.
Doesn't sound like somebody's
mini
disc player.
Yeah.
Whatever it was back in that day. Tell us how you came to work with Earth, Wind & Fire for you toured with them for 6 years.
5 years, yeah.
Okay.
I did a session for Philip Bailey. Oh, yeah. And that kind of started it. And they called me to do the tour. And, who's going to say no? I'm a saxophone player. I literally, when I was a kid, I had Earth, Wind & Fire posters on my ceiling. So they were the first thing and the last thing I saw. And I fantasized about being in the band. And so here I had this opportunity. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Of course I'm going to do it. And so I did it. And I remember at one point that I had been in the band for 2 years. And we were in fact, it was the same tour that we recorded the live album. And we were in we were in Tokyo at the Budokan. And I remember at one point, I was on stage with Maurice doing After the Love Is Gone. Mm. And I'm playing.
How many keys that song goes through?
Oh, God, don't even get me started. So I'm playing the solo with Maurice while he's looking at me and he's singing. And I looked up at the crowd and I saw that the audience was so far away up in the, in the balcony. They were so far away that they were clapping to a different rhythm.
Oh, man.
And I looked at Maurice, I looked at the people, and I turned around and I looked at the band, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm in Earth, Wind & Fire. And it seemed like it took me 2 years to get to that place where I was and I started getting teary because I couldn't believe that my dreams had come true. But it was one of those moments where I'll never forget it because of that.
And for me or for folks not familiar with touring, is that when someone asks you to do that, are they asking you to commit to a full-time year-long engagement, or is it a seasonal thing with most bands or a band like that? And how does that go?
Well, it depends. It really depends. There are tours that are 18 months long.
Oh, man.
Like Michael Jackson would tour for 18 months. So you have to give him an 18-month commitment. With Earth, when it first started, it was a 5-week commitment. We're going to go out on the road for 5 weeks. That's it. Can't give you anything else. Well, 5 weeks became almost a year. And it just kept going. You know, it just literally exploded. Those first 5 weeks, we were doing large theaters. And then after that, it ended up becoming huge theaters. And then after that, we literally had a band meeting as to whether we were going to go out and do Radio City-sized theaters for a week or Madison Square Garden for one night. Like, what do we do? Because we're being asked to do arenas at this point. So the band had sort of come back and become super popular again.
Wow.
It was fun.
And now Philip Bailey's son is in the band.
Yeah, he is. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Passing it on.
Yeah.
For the last 10 years, Scott's been touring, writing, and recording with the legendary Sergio Mendes. Here's John Legend singing Don't Say Goodbye, a song Scott co-wrote with Mendes and John Legend from Mendes' 2014 album, Magic.
And don't say goodbye tonight. Save that kiss for the morning light. Till the sun comes up, we'll be lost in us. Don't say goodbye, the night was made for love.
Stylistically, how do you tie what you already know into what you know that Sergio wants or wanted when you first met him?
Well, it was interesting when I first met him because he wanted me to do some horn arrangements for the record. And so I did one song, and he liked it so much that he asked me if I could do another song. I was like, yeah, sure. And then I ended up doing the whole album for him. And he just trusts me. And I think it's less about that he trusts me and more about that he trusts himself. And he trusts his instincts about musicians and people. And so he has given me a great degree of autonomy. In all the years I've worked with him, only one time did he question a voicing of a chord. Because he was like, I don't know about that voicing. So I went to the piano and I showed him what it was going to end up being when I finished putting all the horns down. And he was like, ooh, that's really cool.
Just like a mock-up kind of.
Well, no, we were in the studio, but we're doing it, voice by voice.
Right.
And because I had like 4 different layers.
Oh, you mean you were overdubbing yourself?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
And so I had 4 different layers of things, and he was like, "Ooh, I don't know about that chord." I said,
Wait for the 6th one.
because it was like it was like a 7-note voicing, I think.
Right, okay,
so,
yeah.
and then he was like, "Ooh, that's really cool. I love that chord." So,
and when you go on tour with him or anyone, you're writing kind of at the same time, right? For him,
many times, yeah, because like we'll be writing for the next record as we're on tour. So I have my computer out there and I'm working and playing stuff for him, and yeah.
And he knows that you have a studio, right?
He does. In fact, not only does he know, this is a gift from him.
Oh, a piano, wow.
Yep.
Weighted, what even?
It's a motif, a Yamaha motif.
Oh, wow.
We did the Hollywood Bowl last summer.
I saw that advertised, yeah.
And so after the gig, he told his guy, he said, take that over to Scott's studio. And I was like, oh, really? Are you coming by? He's like, no, that's my gift to your studio.
Oh, wow.
I was like, wow, really? The very keyboard that you played at Hollywood Bowl?
And you knew it was exactly 56 inches long or whatever.
Well, the funny thing is that we measured for a keyboard of this type.
Oh, okay.
So
you already...
yeah, so we sort of pre-measured for it, so it perfectly fit.
And one other question I had about touring is how do you keep up with other work that you're doing at the same time without kind of offending the person you're with at the time, or do you even try, or maybe you've tried and it doesn't work, or how does that work when you have, because you're a busy guy and you got things going on when you come back, and you have to be prepared for that when you get back.
Well, I mean, you have to prioritize yourself. You have to prioritize your schedule, and you have to know that you may get a little less sleep, but so if I'm in Japan with Sergio, he sort of requires me in the evenings, which means all day long those are my time to do anything else. So if there's any other outstanding projects, I do that during the day. And a lot of times, it's like it'll be writing projects, and so I'll do that from my hotel room.
And he doesn't mind.
He doesn't mind. No, not at all.
He understands.
Exactly.
I think most people do.
Yeah.
You mentioned Japan, and before we leave this topic, I just it came into my head. Seems like the Japanese love jazz more than the Americans now. I mean, and that even extends to Brazilian jazz, apparently. Where do you feel the most love around the world, or the people appreciate, at least Sergio's band?
I mean, Japan's special, period. It's just a special place on the planet Earth.
You talk about it a lot when we're together.
I love Japan. I used to live there.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, Japan's great. And it's an unforgettable place. Everybody should go to Japan once just to see it. Spend a week and you'll be changed. It's a beautiful, beautiful country. The people are incredible. But I think that there's just an overall appreciation of the arts, and so I think that that's what they get. But with regard to Sergio, he's a very interesting person because he's a 76-year-old man, and he is unbelievably current right now. I can't mention the artists, but there are very popular artists that are going to be attached to this next project.
Oh, wow.
Very popular, that are on the radio right now, that when they're contacted about, being on Sergio's record, they're like, oh man, I can't wait. That's so cool. I'd love to do that. So when we tour, in particular in Asia, Sergio is like a rock star. We play in Seoul, South Korea, and we play for 35,000 people. We played at this one arena, and we had to come up for 5 encores. They just wouldn't leave.
South Korea.
It's amazing. We go to the Philippines. We only play arenas in the Philippines. We never do clubs.
Wow.
So Sergio is one of those people. He's very relevant and he's very popular. And I think that he's worthy of it after a 50-year career.
From his wonderful debut solo album Testimony, on which he plays and sings, this is Scott's original song, All of a Sudden.
Something came out of nothing and I fallen in love with you. I got me losing my mind and I don't know what to do. You caught me by surprise and I'm falling in love with you. And all I think about is spending my life with you. You're so damn fly.
So I met you playing on television shows, and I wanted to ask you how you got your start doing that. When did it start? Was it the Singing Bee? Was it before that?
It was the Singing Bee that sort of started my foray into television.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a show on NBC starring Joey Fatone, and it was super challenging because a lot of times we wouldn't have music. They would just throw songs at us, like the Jetsons theme song.
Oh, that's a hard one.
And so we're 3 guys. It's me, Lee Thornburg, and Andrew Littman.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And there's a full woodwind section there. So I'm like, So I realized, okay, play piccolo for this section. You got to switch to clarinet, and then you got to switch to alto, and then pick up the flute again. And I had a whole series of instruments just on my lap, waiting to be played and dropped and played and dropped. It was crazy.
I love that those contest shows are great because they hire live musicians.
Yeah.
And next, you went on to The Voice, American Idol, probably not in this order, and now Dancing with the Stars. You're in the main band, and you guys have what, about 10 or 15 of you, including the singers?
Yeah, I think so. Something like that.
That's a good size. Even though the last band isn't doing it anymore, I think it's still great that they hire even that many folks. Tell us a little bit about writing for them, because you've been writing a lot of horn charts for
We
them
tend
too.
to get the cues on like a Tuesday or Wednesday, and we have rehearsals on Friday. So you have 48 hours, if you're lucky, to turn around.
Because is that when they choose the songs for their dance?
Yeah, well, that's when we get. I think they choose the songs before.
Okay.
But sometimes there's legalities as to what they can or cannot play. So we get the final list as arrangers.
They send it to the lawyers.
Probably.
And then you get it after that.
Exactly. And so they get to us, and sometimes we have 48 hours. Sometimes we have less. But as you move on into the season, the songs get a little longer, a little more involved. If you have a movie night or a Disney night, then it's super orchestrated.
I remember you guys had one recently, right?
Yeah, and so
Disney
it just becomes a real thing, in terms of arranging how you do that.
Yeah, that's a lot of work, especially figuring out how to fit it into basically is it 4-horn band?
Yes, there's 4 of us.
But you have a lot of singers. They can cover a lot of stuff. They were great.
There's 4 singers, 4 horns.
That's a lot of singers for these days, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
but you need to have it because
Of course,
there's so much stuff going on, and a lot of the character voices. I mean, you do any record now has 18 levels of overdubs and all that stuff. There's all kinds of vocals and layers of things going on. So
speaking of vocals, you're a singer too, and have you been able to incorporate that into Dancing with Stars at all? Have you been able to sing at all with him?
no, I almost sang on one episode, but I didn't.
If you guys haven't heard him sing, you need to go listen to his album. You need to listen to his first album, Testimony. He sings a lot on that. Great voice. And you can find him on YouTube also singing some Earth, Wind, and Fire songs, and with Sergio too, right?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And who's the girl that sings with you guys?
Katie Hampton.
Katie, I've met
Yeah,
her. She's
great
too. And
Yeah.
you guys together sound great. I can't remember the name of the tune I saw on YouTube.
Never Gonna Let You Go.
Yes.
Yeah, I love singing that song with her.
It's so high.
It's
How do
really
you do
high.
it? You gotta, I don't know, drink some coffee before that one. I don't know. One of the most interesting parts about your story, I think, is that you took a break from music at some point.
I did.
In order to have a real job.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know what you wanted to say about that, but if you'd like to talk about that, I found it very fascinating because you came back stronger, it seems, and you're going gangbusters in music now.
Uh-huh.
And people would think, I think most folks would think, if you take several years off, you're done as a musician, artist, or freelancer. You'll fall in love with the paycheck or the consistency of things. And that would be my temptation, I think, going into that. So how did you come back stronger?
God, first and foremost. But I was a facilities manager for a credit union in Los Angeles, and I had 7 properties that I managed. And it was great, or 5 properties, I think. But it was a great job, something that I thought that I would never do. Why would I do something like that? But I liked the creative aspects of the job, and I liked the consistency of it. And not even in terms of pay, but consistency in terms of people. That one of the things that I started to not like about the music business was the changeness of it. That you go from gig to gig to gig, session to session to session, tour to tour to tour, but you don't make any really long-lasting connections to people. So what I liked about this job was that every day if I looked at that desk, that woman was going to be there. And I liked knowing that. And so there is a settledness in my spirit that this place gave me. And it also gave me some room from the music business because I had gotten really bitter about the way the music business is run. And it made me hate music. So I had to do something else because I didn't start to become a musician to hate the very thing that I loved. So I stopped doing it, and people began to understand, well, Scott's not available till after 5 o'clock. And they would hire me for gigs or sessions after 5 o'clock.
But you didn't stop altogether playing.
No, but I considered it.
Right.
I actually did, because I was that bitter about the music business that I considered selling all my stuff.
It can. I think it can happen to anyone involved in entertainment, any aspect of filmmakers. And what I like about being around you is that you don't let any of that get to you. At least now, least now, since I've known you. So
you can't. And the thing is, like sort of my advice to anybody is to remember why you got into this thing. That it's for the love of the art. If you happen to make money from it, cool, praise God. But if you don't make money from it, don't stop doing what you're doing. Just do something else and keep doing your art. They're not mutually exclusive. You can be a functioning person with a corporate job that pays you. Let that economic stability give you creative options. So now you can say, no, I don't want to do that.
Well, that was one of the things you told me a while ago, is that gave you freedom. It was like counterintuitive, because you'd think, well, now you don't have all this time to do what you want. But you said it actually gave you some income to do that with, and also I think sometimes when you restrict the time you have to do something, you appreciate it more.
Absolutely.
Like Stravinsky didn't like to write for a big orchestra.
Right.
He wrote for 12 with Soldier's Tale or whatever it was, smaller groups.
Yep.
And I think it's that way with... Tell me if you think it's that
No,
way.
I do agree with that. And I think one of the problems that we artists faced is time management. I don't think we're real good at that, just in and of our nature. But I think one of the reasons that we're not good at it is, one, we're not taught it, and two, we have too much of it. So when you have a limited amount of time, like the only time I had time was after 6 o'clock at night. So from 6 o'clock at night until I had to wake up the next morning, that was my window to write or to practice or to do anything I needed to do. And I found myself getting really, really productive because I had a limit as to how much time I could write or just be creative in. I could only be a musician for a minute. So we got to go do it.
Before we end, I just have a couple more general questions.
Okay.
To all the young musicians out there who I wish I had a podcast to listen to when I was in high school, or some kind of source outside of school to advise me as far as a music career. What advice would you give a young, maybe they're in band in high school and they're a standout, or maybe they're not, but they're contemplating a career in music, specifically freelancing in the way that you have done? What would your advice be to them when they're in high school?
I would say diversify as much as you can. Diversify instrumentally, diversify musically, and put yourself on a path of staying open and make being open a lifestyle. I think one of the reasons why I work is because not only do I do a lot of stuff, but I can do a lot of stuff in a lot of different styles.
Right, yeah.
I did, like, going back to the sort of the classical things. It's very interesting, actually. I had a bluegrass session a long time ago, and I'd never played, nor had I listened to bluegrass music. But when I listened to it at the studio, it was reminiscent of Scottish folk songs and German folk songs that I'd learned when I was in school. And all I did was my interpretation as a classical musician of Scottish and German folk songs, having no idea that the people that became the people that composed bluegrass music were Scottish and German. Had no idea until after.
They moved to Tennessee.
They moved. And it's just an interesting thing, like the blending of those two sort of cultures became this beautiful American music. But I didn't know that.
You know that.
All I could hear because of my classical training was, it sounds sort of like Scottish folk songs. Kind of sounds like German folk songs. Well, I'll just do that. And they loved it. And they thought that I knew how to play bluegrass. And I'd never played bluegrass in my life.
Going back to kind of time management, when business is slow, gigs are not flowing in like they have, and it seems like nothing is in the schedule book or the calendar, what is your recourse or strategy, or what do you fall back on to keep the consistency and to bring new work in? What is your strategy there?
Well, first of all gigs end. All gigs end. Dancing with the Stars ends. Everything ends. So no matter how much you're guaranteed something, you're never really guaranteed it. All things end. So with that in mind, I think it's really important to keep yourself involved in a lot of different things so that when that thing ends, it's not a shock to your system. It's just like okay. Wow, that's inconvenient. And you just keep it moving. But that sort of ties back into what I was saying about being diversified. You have to keep yourself engaged, keep yourself interested, keep yourself involved in a lot of different things so that when one thing sort of stops, or if a couple things stop, it doesn't take you out because you're still involved. And if you have, there's still stuff to learn. Like I have that crazy book right there that it's called A Theory of Harmony by Ernst Levy. And I learned about this book from Jacob Collier, the ridiculous musician. And he was talking about it on YouTube on a video. And I was like, wow, I never heard of that book. That's really interesting. So I bought the book. Have I read it yet? Yeah, a little bit of it. But I just really don't have the time. So now I sort of have some time. So now I'm getting back into that book. There's always stuff to learn. There's always instruments to practice. There's always new people to talk to. There's music to go hear. So to me, what you do in those downtimes is grow. You use those downtimes as a blessing, because you may not always have those downtimes. So you might need this downtime to prepare you for, oh my God, I'm so busy, I can't even think about anything right now. So good thing I use that downtime.
Sometimes it all happens at once, right?
Exactly.
It's never.
Never.
The freelance
It's feast
world,
or famine.
you're going to get called for 10 things
Yes.
on the same week.
Exactly.
I think sometimes what happens to me, I lose contact with folks that really helped me creatively, or just encouraged me, or the network of folks that I know I have but I've lost touch with, or whatever, and then I need to also go and make new contacts for business reasons and also creatively. But what is your favorite way to network with new people and or the folks that you already know?
Social media is beautiful because it's free. You don't have to pay a marketing firm to do it. And so you can reach out to people on social media. You can I'll just go to your page. Just say, hey, Knox, what's going on? Just thinking about you. Hope everything's cool. Hope you're doing great. Something small like that is enough for you to say, oh my God, you know what? I got to call that guy. I haven't talked to him. And you might have a session for me. But because I took the time just to say, hey, all of a sudden I'm doing a session. And so it helps to just reach out to people. Just reach out. Be an actual human being. Don't just wait for your phone to ring or for your email or, for somebody to reach out to you. Reach out to people. Go be involved. That's what I was saying about being engaged. You got to go be involved. Go out. Go out to a club where there's young musicians that are hanging out. Find out what they're listening to. Maybe you can learn something from them.
Definitely. Especially your son.
Yeah.
Michael, right?
Yeah.
Oh, man. Everybody go check out Michael MAYO. But also, primarily check out Scott MAYO, scottmayomusic.com, and they can find you on iTunes, Spotify, I imagine.
Yeah.
All of the streaming guys,
exactly,
all of the things, as they say. And you can find him, check out his tour schedule on his website. And Dancing with the Stars starts again, on ABC, right?
I believe in the spring.
In the spring.
But I'm not sure. I may not be doing it because I might be so busy.
Scott, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you
for doing this. This is awesome.
This is cool.
KnoxCast is brought to you by yours truly. I got more great interviews lined up with some really prolific and fantastic friends, so please subscribe to KnoxCast on iTunes, Stitcher, and follow me on Twitter at TrumpetKnox for podcast updates.
You are by my side with me.
Stay tuned and stay musical.
Today